Philadelphia woke under soft gray clouds and the scent of morning rain. Inside her small apartment, Liora Daniels stood before the mirror, curling the ends of her dark hair and trying to quiet the storm in her chest. Today was supposed to be a happy day, her sister's wedding day, and she wanted nothing more than to smile through it. Cassidy Daniels had always been larger than life. Where Liora was gentle and reserved, Cassidy was confident, quick-tongued, and charming. They were opposites, yet inseparable since childhood. Liora adored her sister, even when her light sometimes cast a long shadow. Months earlier, Cassidy had gushed over the phone. "I've met someone, Leo. He's kind, he listens, he makes me laugh." She never mentioned a name. Liora hadn't thought to ask. All she cared about was Cassidy's happiness. Now, wearing the lavender bridesmaid dress Cassidy had chosen, Liora stepped into St. Matthew's Church on Market Street. The air smelled of roses and polished wood. Strings hummed softly while guests filled the pews, exchanging cheerful whispers. Everything sparkled, flowers, lights, faces. She greeted relatives, hugged old friends, and took her place near the front. Then her eyes drifted toward the altar and froze. The groom turned to speak with his best man, his face briefly catching the light from the stained glass windows. Jalen, her Jalen, the same man who had knelt before her at Penn's Landing 3 months ago, promising forever. The bouquet trembled in her hand. She blinked hard, hoping her mind had tricked her. But when he looked up again, his gaze collided with hers. For a heartbeat, shock flashed in his eyes, then disappeared behind a strained smile. He turned away. The church blurred around her. The chatter faded. Liora stood motionless, a statue wrapped in satin. Moments later, the music swelled and the doors opened. Cassidy appeared, radiant in lace and pearls, clutching their father's arm. Guests rose in admiration. Leora's knees nearly buckled. As the bride walked past, she smiled at her sister. Pure joy, no hesitation, no guilt. That smile crushed whatever remained of Leora's hope. The priest began to speak, but his words dissolved into a distant hum. When he reached the line, "If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined," the room fell silent. Leora's heart screamed yes, but her lips stayed closed. Her mother's tearful smile, her father's proud expression, those images silenced her voice. "I do," Jalen said firmly. "I do," Cassidy replied, glowing. Applause filled the hall. Leora's world splintered in slow motion. After the ceremony, she smiled for photographs, hugged relatives, and clapped during speeches. Each act felt like walking barefoot over glass. At the reception downtown, gold lights shimmered against the ballroom walls. Liora sat quietly at her table, pretending to eat. Cassidy and Jalen floated from group to group, laughing easily, a picture of bliss. Then Cassidy took the microphone. "I just want to thank my little sister," she said brightly. "She's always been there for me, even when life surprised both of us." Gentle laughter rippled through the room. "Love is strange," Cassidy continued. "Sometimes the right person is hidden in the wrong story." Guests chuckled again. Jalen stepped beside her and added, "Some people don't realize what they have until someone else shows them." The crowd roared. Liora sat still, cheeks burning. She placed her napkin on the table, rose quietly, and slipped out through the side door. Outside, the air was cool and sharp. Street lights glimmered on wet pavement as she walked slowly to her car. The noise of laughter followed her faintly, then faded. When she finally sat behind the wheel, her hands shook. Tears streamed down her cheeks unchecked. She cried until exhaustion dulled the sound of her sobs. That night, Liora stared out her apartment window as dawn crept in. Her reflection looked unfamiliar, pale, hollow-eyed, broken. By morning, she knew she couldn't stay. She packed a small suitcase, left a brief note for her parents, "I need some time away. Don't worry," and caught the first train out of Philadelphia. As the city skyline disappeared behind her, she whispered a promise into the window's reflection. "You'll never cry for them again." But she did. She cried all the way to Pittsburgh. The train rocked gently as it moved west toward Pittsburgh, its wheels humming against the tracks. Liora sat by the window, motionless, her reflection ghostly against the glass. Fields and rivers flashed by, but she saw none of them. Her eyes were dry now, emptied of tears but heavy with disbelief. When the train stopped at the terminal, she stepped out into a city that felt both unfamiliar and forgiving. The air smelled faintly of coffee and steel. She found a small inn near the station and paid for 3 nights with shaky hands. The woman at the counter smiled kindly, but Liora could barely return it. That evening she walked along quiet streets, lined with bare trees and dim shop windows. The cold bit her fingers, but the silence soothed her. Philadelphia had felt suffocating. Pittsburgh, at least, gave her space to breathe. The next morning, she spotted a help-wanted sign in the window of a small café called Marion's Place. Inside, the scent of cinnamon and espresso wrapped around her like a blanket. Behind the counter stood Marion, a woman in her 60s with a soft voice and silver hair pulled into a bun. "Can I help you?" Marion asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Liora hesitated. "I saw the sign. I'm looking for work." "Ever worked in a café before?" "Yes," she lied, though she'd only volunteered once at a campus bakery during college. Marion studied her for a moment and then nodded. "You look like someone who needs a fresh start. Be here at 7 tomorrow morning." Leora's lips twitched in what almost became a smile. "Thank you." From that day on, she built a quiet rhythm. The mornings began with the soft grind of coffee beans and the clink of ceramic mugs. The café filled with regulars who came not for excitement, but for familiarity. Truck drivers, teachers, retired men with newspapers folded neatly under their arms. No one asked about her past. No one knew about Cassidy or Jalen, and that anonymity saved her. At night, she returned to the small rented room above a bakery. She'd stare at the ceiling, sometimes crying softly, sometimes just lying in silence. But each dawn felt a little lighter than the last. Weeks slipped into months. Her sadness dulled, becoming a quiet ache instead of an open wound. She noticed little joys again: the smell of muffins fresh out of the oven, the way sunlight fell across the counter, the laughter of strangers. One gray afternoon, the café bell jingled. A man stepped in, shaking rain from his jacket. He was tall, with a calm face and eyes that carried their own stories. "Can I get a black coffee and a slice of apple pie?" he asked. Liora nodded, coming right up. When she handed him his order, he smiled and said, "You look like someone who appreciates silence." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "Is that your way of saying I look tired?" He chuckled. "No, just thoughtful." That was how she met Eli Monroe. From then on, he came every morning, always ordering the same thing. Sometimes he sat near the window with his laptop. Other times he read a book. Slowly they began to talk. He told her he was a writer who had moved from Chicago after losing his job. He called Pittsburgh his restart button. "I think I hate mine too," she said softly one morning. He smiled. "Then we have something in common." One evening, when rain poured hard against the glass, Eli waited until closing time. "It's too wet for you to walk alone," he said, holding up his umbrella. "Let me walk you home." They strolled down the quiet street, water shimmering under streetlights. Neither spoke for a while. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. When they reached her door, Liora turned and said, "Thank you for not asking too many questions." He smiled. "You don't owe anyone your story until you're ready to tell it." Those words settled deep in her heart. Over the following months, their friendship grew naturally. He'd bring her books with notes scribbled in the margins, quotes about second chances, about healing, about love after loss. Sometimes he'd sit in the corner just to keep her company as she worked. One night, she finally opened up. They sat on a park bench overlooking the river. The air smelled like wet leaves and cold stone. I was engaged once, she began quietly, to someone I thought I'd grow old with. Eli didn't interrupt. He married my sister, she continued, her voice breaking slightly, and they mocked me during their wedding speech. She expected him to react with shock, but he only nodded slowly, his expression gentle. You didn't lose love, Liora, he said. You lost someone who didn't deserve to give it. Her tears came again, but this time they felt clean, not heavy. After that night, something inside her shifted. She started painting again, filling canvases with colors she thought she'd forgotten. She laughed more. She talked more. The sadness didn't vanish completely, but it stopped defining her. Marion noticed the change. You're smiling again, she said one morning, pouring coffee. Liora grinned faintly. I guess I am. You remind me of spring after a long winter, Marion said. That evening, Eli took her to a small open mic reading at a bookstore downtown. The room smelled like paper and rain. When it was his turn, he read a piece titled The Woman Who Walked Through Fire. His voice was calm, steady, filled with quiet admiration. Every line felt like it belonged to her. When the reading ended, she wiped a tear from her cheek. Was that about me? She whispered. He smiled. You inspired it. Afterward, they walked by the river again. The night was cool, the city lights reflecting off the water. I think you're healing, Eli said. Not completely, Liora replied, but I'm getting there. He nodded. That's enough. By spring, Liora had truly begun to feel like herself again. She laughed with customers, painted on weekends, and even started helping Marion with the business side of the café. One morning, Marion handed her a small key. What's this? Liora asked. It's time you ran this place, Marion said. You've breathed life back into it. Tears filled Leora's eyes as she hugged her. It was the first time she'd felt proud of herself in years, not for someone else, but for her own strength. She didn't know it yet, but peace had finally found her. A year had passed since the wedding that changed everything. The scars beneath Leora's calm smile had begun to fade. Marion's place, now renamed Second Morning Café, had become her safe haven, a cozy space filled with the scent of vanilla, cinnamon, and hope. The once broken woman who had fled Philadelphia was now the owner of a thriving café where strangers came to heal in their own quiet ways. Eli Monroe remained a constant presence. He came each morning with a notebook tucked under his arm and a soft grin that seemed to brighten the air. Their friendship had deepened naturally, word by word, silence by silence. With Eli, there was no pretending, no fear. He made her laugh again, and that laughter became the softest sound of her healing. Then one snowy morning, as Liora wiped down the counter, her phone buzzed. A message from her mother appeared on the screen. Cassidy has been asking about you. Things didn't work out. Jalen left her. She read the message twice, maybe 3 times, before quietly setting the phone aside. The words didn't sting the way she thought they would. There was no anger, no sense of triumph, only calm. That evening, she sat by the cafe window, watching snow drift gently through the streetlights. It felt poetic somehow, life erasing what had once been too bright and painful. A week later, she saw her sister again. The bell above the cafe door jingled softly, and when Liora looked up, she froze. Cassidy stood there, wrapped in a long gray coat, her face pale, her eyes swollen. Gone was the confident woman in pearls and laughter. What stood before her was someone broken, haunted. "Liora!" Cassidy whispered, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" Liora hesitated but nodded. She guided her sister to a corner table by the window. The cafe was nearly empty. The snow outside muffled the world, making the moment feel heavier. Cassidy's tears came before her words. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaking. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to hear me. I thought I was in love, Liora. I thought Jalen was everything. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was jealous of how people loved you, how calm you always were. I wanted to have what you had, even if it meant taking it from you. Liora sat silently, her gaze steady but kind. Cassidy's voice broke. He betrayed me too. He took my savings, cheated with other women, and disappeared. I have nothing left, not even peace. The café felt quiet enough to hear their breathing. Liora finally spoke, her tone soft and even. Cassidy, I forgave you a long time ago. Not because you earned it, but because I couldn't carry that pain forever. Hating you would have destroyed me more than what you did. Cassidy's lips quivered. You forgave me? Yes, Liora said. But forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It just means I've chosen peace over pain. Tears streamed down Cassidy's cheeks. She whispered, You're stronger than I'll ever be. No, Liora replied gently. I just learned to stop holding on to what was burning me. They sat in silence for a moment longer. Then Cassidy rose, still crying, and whispered, Thank you for letting me say it. Liora nodded. Take care of yourself. When Cassidy left, the bell above the door chimed softly. Liora stood still for a moment, then exhaled deeply. She hadn't realized how long she'd been holding her breath. That evening, Eli arrived at his usual hour. He noticed her expression immediately. You look lighter, he said. My sister came today, Liora replied quietly. She finally knows what heartbreak feels like. Eli nodded slowly. And how do you feel? Free, she said simply. He smiled, the kind of smile that understood more than words ever could. That's what healing looks like. Over the next few months, their bond deepened. What began as gentle companionship grew into something stronger. Love, but of a quieter, truer kind. There were no grand declarations, just steady presence, laughter, and peace. Together, they turned Second Morning into something more than a café. It became a community, part bookshop, part art gallery, and part refuge for anyone needing a fresh start. Liora hung her own paintings on the walls, each one a reflection of her journey. Broken pieces turned into color and light. One evening, during an open mic poetry night, Eli took the stage. He opened his worn notebook and began to read. This is for the woman who rose from the ashes of betrayal, who learned that silence can be strength and forgiveness can be freedom. This is for the woman who found peace not by forgetting, but by surviving. His eyes met Liora's across the room. She smiled through tears as the crowd applauded. When he stepped down, she met him halfway and whispered, That was beautiful. He grinned. You inspired it. Later, as they closed the cafe together, snow falling quietly outside, Eli reached for her hand. You turned pain into something beautiful, he said softly. Liora smiled. Maybe pain was just the foundation I needed. He squeezed her hand. Sometimes losing everything is how we find what's real. They stood by the window, the city lights reflecting in the glass, both of them silent and content. Months later, the past reached them once more, not with noise, but with quiet justice. Jalen Carter's name appeared in a local news headline. Philadelphia businessman arrested for fraud and identity theft. Liora read the article once, then closed it calmly. There was nothing left to feel. The universe had finished what she could not. Cassidy, she later learned, had moved back in with their parents and was rebuilding her life as a teacher. She called sometimes. Their conversations were short, polite, almost tender. The wounds had become scars, faint reminders of what used to be. One evening, Liora locked the cafe doors and looked out at the softly lit street. Eli came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. You're quiet tonight, he said. I was just thinking, she murmured. A year ago, I thought my life had ended. He smiled against her hair. And now I know it was just beginning. Outside, The snow continued to fall, blanketing the streets in stillness. The city was alive with lights, but inside the café, there was only warmth and peace. Liora leaned her head against Eli's chest and closed her eyes. The ache that had once consumed her was gone. The girl who had walked out of a wedding in tears no longer existed. In her place stood a woman reborn through pain, forgiveness, and love. She hadn't lost anything that day in Philadelphia. She had only shed what wasn't meant to stay. And in its place, she had found everything that was peace, love, purpose, herself. Thanks for watching.